A power of attorney gives you the peace of mind of knowing you've protected yourself and those you love by assigning someone you trust to make key decisions for you when you can't. We don't know if or when that day will come, so the sooner we do it, the better. Completing this important legal document incorrectly can lead to costly delays, and, in worst case scenarios, an uncorrected error can invalidate your power of attorney. At which we'll help you get it right. Our specialist review service puts your power of attorney in the best place to be approved first time, and to work when you need it to. Our specialists will go through it with a fine-tooth comb to make sure it's error-free and legally compliant. Buy today or before the 30th of June to save 30%. And to do that, just head to whichwills.which.co.uk/POA offer. That's whichwills.which.co.uk/POA offer.
When life gives you questions, Which? Get answers.
Welcome to the Which Money Podcast, your weekly hit of money news and personal finance hacks to help make you better off. I'm your host, Lucia Ariano, and here's what's coming up this week.
It's absolutely about working out what works for you, and if you really do need to make that claim, what is the policy that's going to make your life a little bit easier?
If you look at the data from the FCA, they kind of show how many claims are paid out across 34 types of insurance. And then if you look at single trip and European annual policies, they're both in the bottom 5, like turning down about a quarter of claims.
The summer is coming up, though it might not feel like it with the weather we've just had. But if it means you've got a holiday booked or you're thinking about it, this week we're deep diving into the must-have product, travel insurance. With so many different policies out there, we'll be getting to grips with how to find the best policy, what you can get covered, and what can go wrong if you don't have insurance. We'll also be talking about what makes a good policy and revealing the best travel insurance providers. So to help us through it all and to help you pick the right policy, we're joined by Which Money's Dean Sobers and another familiar voice, Chelsea Dickinson, a travel blogger and journalist. Hello, both.
Hello.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you so much for coming on the show today, both of you. Well, shall we start from the beginning? And Chelsea, maybe if you can start us off with just a little bit on when we should be taking out travel insurance. And I think the main question for me around this topic is when we should be taking it out. Is it just for holidaying abroad?
Yeah, a great place to start, because actually this is where a lot of us go wrong. We forget about the travel insurance, and then it's perhaps the day before we go away, we go, oh yeah, we need to get that sorted. And actually for some people, it's too late at that point, because there are things that could go wrong with your trip even before you go away. Things such as, what if one of you was to get ill, you aren't able to travel, how are you going to claim that money back? That is why it's so important for you to be booking your insurance in as soon as you've booked the holiday in. So yeah, as soon as you know that you're going away, get a policy sorted. Of course, a big win if you go away perhaps more than 2 times a year is to get an annual policy, and then you don't really have to think about it. But definitely get that sorted. And you're absolutely right to flag whether this is just a thing for abroad. No. If you are holidaying in the UK, there are still so many things that could potentially go wrong. Fingers crossed that they don't. So absolutely get yourself sorted with insurance, even if you're staying here.
I have to confess, as you were saying that, Chelsea, I do fall into the camp where I usually end up buying it in the airport. I know it's wrong. But Dean, I suppose you must agree.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I'd say two reasons for me, really. One is that the earlier you buy it prior to that sort of airport scenario, you're in less of a rush. You can make more of a considered decision. You've probably got more options available, which probably means you'll end up getting a better policy for you. And then, second, just to echo Chelsea's point, if you buy your travel insurance just as you travel, what you're not getting out of it is the benefit of that cancellation cover, which is one of the most claimed on parts of a travel insurance policy.
And should we start talking then about why travel insurance is so important? What are the sorts of things that can go wrong, and how much could it cost you?
I think that people straight away are aware of the importance of if you were to get ill whilst abroad. So the medical cover is a big one that people tend to think about. And it's actually a really interesting point, because that's also a reason that some people don't get insurance, because they think they're covered. If you're going to the EU, we have what used to be the EHIC insurance
Yes.
cards, which are now the GHIC. We are still covered if we go to quite a few of these countries. However, they do not give you the same coverage as these full travel insurance policies. And also, they only cover certain things.
And while we're just on this point, can I stop you just to explain a little bit more about this GHIC? So our listeners might remember the EHIC. Maybe they had one, maybe they didn't. Is the GHIC now something that we need to apply for?
When we're back as a member of the European Union, we could apply for an EHIC, which stands for the European Health Insurance Card. Now that we are not a member, it's still an option. It's just changed names a little bit. It's called the Global Health Insurance Card. But still, in the same way, we can apply for it for free online. Make sure you're not paying for it. If you are, it's probably on some kind of scammy website. But the good thing about this is it means in many countries in the European Union, you can stride into a health service and get looked after without a lot of questions. So this is super helpful because you may as well do it. It is free to do, but it certainly does not replace a comprehensive travel insurance policy. There's so much more that a good travel insurance policy will cover you when it comes to medical expenses. And even to, and I'm sorry to get morbid so quick, but the truth is, unfortunately, people who, whether it's an accident, whether it's completely natural, people do die when they are traveling abroad sometimes. And it's those costs such as how are you going to get the body home? And they're the things that can end up costing a family so much money. We've seen it in the news. We've seen it happen. They are the bills that you don't think about because you don't want to think about.
No.
But that's why it's so important to get a policy that has all these things in it.
I'm sure, Dean, you've got plenty of things to add as well on, what else can go wrong and how much can it cost you?
So travel insurance covers all sorts of things. It's almost like a kind of a sort of Swiss Army knife. So on one hand, yes, so there's medical costs, there's cancellation costs, which you already discussed. There's expenses, for example, if your journeys are subject to delays, something delays your trip. If you lose money, policies can pay out for that. There's possessions and luggage cover. So if your possessions are stolen or go missing, there's cover in that for that as well. There's liability cover. So if something happens where there's some sort of an accident, you end up getting sued, there's protection in there for those sorts of eventualities. Then on top of that, there's all these things you can add to the policy as well. So you might want to tailor it for traveling. And if you're doing like a skiing holiday, there's winter sports cover, golf cover. There's all sorts of different things. Basically, they try to make them as widely encompass anything that could go wrong on a holiday where it could cost you money and to have that financial protection in place.
Well, that's it, isn't it? They do cover such a breadth. And so when you're looking to get travel insurance, it is hard to know, what's my priority? You might be faced with a table of numbers and how much the excess would cost for different things. And you're wondering, where do my priorities lie? And I suppose when it comes then to the things you're looking for in a policy, should we talk about that? What are the top things that you would recommend our listeners look out for?
I think it's definitely making sure that there is enough coverage for the really big key areas, so such as medical expenses. If it's something, it's a bit rogue, isn't it? You look at the numbers and it says, we'll cover you up to €1 million.
It's usually millions, isn't it, for medical? It's quite hard to know what that means.
Absolutely. But I think in general, it is like the higher, the better when it comes to medical. You don't want to be scrimping on a policy that isn't giving you much medical coverage, because in truth, that's the area that could really cost you a lot if you end up going for a policy that's, for instance, I wouldn't even look twice at anything that was less than $1 million. I tend to hone into the ones that are more like 5 million coverage, because quite frankly, it's the one area which you don't really have much control over if the worst of the worst was to happen. So I think it's just being aware that when you're looking at the costs in terms of what you're being offered, this is why comparison websites are so handy, because what they actually do is they will lay out all the different types of insurance policies, but you'll be able to see the amounts stacked on top of each other, i.e. you will really quickly see if one of them is offering a really bad coverage deal compared to the others. And that's what's really handy. Just get like an overview of what is out there on the market and what you're getting for the price that you're paying for it. And as I think it won't be a surprise to anyone as you pay a bit more for your travel insurance policy. That's where you'll see the coverage starting to get better and better. And I think that is a big flag for the difference of what sometimes can be £5. Is it actually worth you just spending a little bit more on that kind of stuff? And another big flag for me is definitely the excess that you have to pay on certain insurance policies. If it's too high, if you're like me, you're just never going to claim. Because if so, you're just wasting money by buying an insurance policy that you're not even going to use.
And Dean, then, is there anything you would add, so after medical and, checking the excess amounts, what else would you say is, right up there for you?
A lot of it comes down to like cancellation cover. That's always something that my attention goes to quite quickly. I guess one of the reasons for that is that tends to be one of the most complicated parts of insurance policies, where you will often run into areas where it seems to be telling you it does something, or it seems to be kind of offering you a blank check, only for there to be little areas of the terms and conditions that could catch you out. So, for example, you might see in like a table on a comparison site that it's got, let's say, £5,000 cancellation cover. And then you go and you have a look at the policy wording, and it speaks a little bit more length about which sorts of things it would cover you for and which things it wouldn't. Then usually in the things where it says it wouldn't, it will say anything that's mentioned in the general exclusions, which means that you then have to check the general exclusions, where you might find out that it doesn't cover anything related to war. So in kind of my experience, that kind of tends to be one of the areas that kind of requires most attention when you're, picking a policy or just trying to get an idea of it. And then I guess what I'd also say, and this is touching on what you were talking about, Chelsea, is the fact that insurers will tend to have cover that comes in ranges. So you'll see like platinum policies and gold policies and silver and bronze and that sort of thing. And usually the more precious the jewel that's being alluded to usually means that there's more money in the policy and there's probably going to be a lower excess. I guess one thing to be conscious of is that So a really comprehensive, all bells, all whistles policy. It's obviously it's objectively it's the best that insurer will have to offer, but you should also obviously relate it to what it is that you need, what your actual requirements are. So, for example, if I want a single trip policy to cover me for 3 days in a nearby country costing like £500 or something, I probably don't need a policy with £10,000 worth of cancellation cover.
We gave a quick mention earlier to annual policies versus single ones. And I suppose I often wonder when I'm faced with getting my travel insurance, often at the airport, I am going to try and change that. Is there a kind of rule of thumb when an annual policy might be better than getting a single one?
I tend to think if you're somebody who's going on more than 3 holidays a year, it's absolutely worth doing the sums of just working out, is it actually better and more beneficial for me to have that annual trip policy? And that flag around abroad versus the UK is actually a really interesting point around it, because I think a lot of us don't factor in a few nights away in a UK city into all of that, and how helpful it can actually be to sometimes have travel insurance for those type of trips. My sister, for example, she was actually traveling home from a holiday abroad, but came to visit me for a night before she went back home. And unfortunately got her phone stolen from her out by one of the motorbikes. She let come by and swipe it. She was able to claim that on her travel insurance because she was still technically away, because she had an annual policy that covered her for the entire year. So it's that kind of stuff that I think people don't think of when they're doing that calculation, and why in actually a lot of different ways that an annual policy can work out better for your money. But like Dean says, it has to be tailored to your needs. If you are somebody who only goes on 1 holiday a year, you're going to be probably better getting that single trip policy. There's no point in you taking out extra coverage when you're not going to use it. I think what can be super easy to do is just actually imagine your travel for the next year, go on and actually put in your details and compare the prices and add it up and just see for yourself whether you will save money by going annual.
Even if you're lucky to have 2 trips coming up, you can just see how much it would cost for those 2 policies versus an annual one. And if the difference is a few pounds, then maybe it's worth the punt if you think you might be doing other bits.
I think it's a good rule of thumb that annual cover is probably more cost effective for covering multiple trips. it is a rule of thumb. It doesn't apply in all circumstances. So definitely worth testing. I think the one thing that's also worth taking into account is if you are a customer that kind of has trouble finding affordable insurance, so perhaps if you're over 70 or whatever and the premiums are quite high, or if you've got a complex medical history that insurers are often turning you down for, one thing to bear in mind is that some insurers will be willing to offer you single trip cover where they wouldn't be willing to offer you annual cover. So if you're only taking into account annual policy,
2023 was momentous in the fight against fraud. It saw the passing of the Online Safety Act and the Financial Services and Markets Act. Both of these happening after years of exhaustive campaigning from us here at Which. But the battle against scams is far from over. Stay in the know and avoid falling victim to scammers by joining over 450,000 others who have signed up to our Which Scam Alerts. To sign up, head to which.co.uk/scamalert today.
Policies, then you might be missing out on the full range of providers in terms of what they can offer you.
This is a trick that I learned from you guys in terms of the other big thing to think about for annual policy is obviously it's going to cost you more, which, if it's a difference of 30, 40 pounds, perhaps you haven't got that money at that point to splurge on annual policy. But yeah, it was after I came and spoke on another one of Which's podcasts that someone said, is it possible for you to put the annual policy on a 0% credit card or spread the cost in a way so actually you can pay it off in monthly installments? That's something worth thinking about if you know that you honestly will pay it off and not incur an extra fee on it.
So once you know what you need, then how do you choose the right provider? Well, when we come back, we'll hear about our latest research on the best travel insurance companies out there.
Last minute escapes. In the sun. What is the best airline? Or the worst airline? What happens if my flight is delayed or cancelled? Would I be put on a new flight? Or would I be refunded? What if it takes me days to get home? Benefits of a UK staycation.
When life gives you questions, get answers at which.co.uk.
Now, just before we jump back into it, I want to tell you about a brand new series we're going to be bringing you here at Which. We have just started the Which Money Shorts series, which you can find right here on the Money podcast feed. Every fortnight, we'll be giving you a taster of some of the brilliant journalism you can find in the Which Money magazine. Our fantastic team of journalists work all year round to bring Which Money subscribers reviews, investigations and features in the bi-monthly magazine. And it starts this week. We'll be handpicking our favourite pieces and bringing them to life right here on the Which Money podcast feed. So do keep an eye out. The first episode of Which Money Shorts dropped this week on Monday, the 17th of June. Now, back to travel insurance. And Dean, can you start us off? You've just published our latest guide to the best travel insurance providers out there. Woof. Firstly, could you just explain how we judge the policies?
So we do a big survey of travel insurers so that we can find out about the cover that they offer in their policies. And then we look at those policies and we compare them against each other. And we currently look, I think, about 66 areas of each policy. We use all that data to give each policy a score, percentage score that indicates how comprehensive the cover is, at least on paper. So the providers that kind of really impress us in that analysis become candidates for our Best Buy icon. We don't stop there. So the next stage of our assessment is we look at those providers that have effectively made our shortlist. We check the available data about them that's published by the Financial Conduct Authority, which is the industry regulator, and the Financial Ombudsman Service, to look at how often they tend to pay out claims, how often people who make claims complain about the service that they get, how often complaints that end up going to the ombudsman are then upheld by the ombudsman. And so if we then get the impression that there's one provider, the cover looks incredible on paper, but it's only paying out half of its claims, then we will take from that something's off with its service, that the policy isn't working when it's actually put to the test. So the ones that make it through that sort of series of checks, we give our Best Buy icon too.
I love that last bit you were talking about. The claiming part really is important, isn't it? So can we hear a little bit more about that? What have we heard about claims? Like, are many being turned down?
Too many, to be honest. It's infuriating in a way with travel insurance because it's something that, it's not really a kind of a luxury thing. People really need it, as we've been discussing, what all the needs are for it. If you look at the data from the FCA, they kind of show how many claims are paid out across 34 types of insurance. And then if you look into that and you look at single trip and European annual policies, they're both in the bottom 5, like turning down about a quarter of claims. And then if you look at worldwide annual policies, they're a little bit better, but they're still in the bottom 7, turning down about 20% of claims. Now, we've done our own recent survey of our Which members who had recently made a travel insurance claim just to find out how it went for them. And we found that with them, it was 75% reported that their claim was fully accepted. 10% said that their claim was partially accepted, and 6% reported that their claims were rejected. So that's actually slightly better than what we're seeing among the larger population that's reflected in the FCA statistics.
I wonder if that's because that they've bought travel insurance using Which advice, and they've bought a policy that might be more likely to pay out, I don't know, better for their
I like to
needs.
think that. To be honest, I think either way, what it does show you is that there are plenty of customers out there that are finding that when they do make their claim, they're getting less back than they expected, which really does show that you do really need to engage with the policy at the point of purchase and check the policy wording, basically, just to make sure that you're not going to end up getting this nasty surprise at the time that you need to claim.
I'm interested to know, actually, have either of you ever made a claim, been successful? I did when I had just finished my A-levels, went on my first girls' holiday. My bag got stolen on the beach in Crete. It's quite a classic scenario, isn't it? You go away for the first time with your friends and something bad happens and you have to sort it out. But actually, it did get accepted. And I think, it was fully accepted. It's a long time ago now. But have you guys had any experiences?
I recently had to claim for some AirPods that I left on a train in India. And due to the technology of AirPods these days, I got to watch them go up and down the country over the next few days, which was quite entertaining to see. I even managed to get back on the train when it returned 22 hours later to try and find it. But unfortunately, they did escape me once more. So I had to make my first ever travel insurance claim on them. Now, I get travel insurance through one of my credit cards, and it was with Amex, and I have to say they dealt with it very swiftly, and I got the full amount reimbursed. So that's definitely another thing to say, isn't it? To always double check to see if actually you already have a right to a decent travel insurance policy through things like credit cards.
Well, shall we hear then, drum roll please, which providers have been awarded the coveted Best Buys?
Out of the 44 providers that we looked at, 11 had policies that were among our Best Buys. And these were Barclays, Insure & Go, Nationwide, Building Society, All Clear, Just Travel Cover, the Co-op, Santander, Aviva, Puffin, Admiral, and M&S Bank. And if you can't retain all that in your mind, if you go to our website, you can see which policies, which providers got Best Buy status.
And we can pop a link to that in the description of today's show, of course, as well. And do you want to tell us a little bit more about why these 11 out of the 129 policies that you looked at, why these 11 made it?
They made it because they passed our criteria. So basically, they're all kind of in the upper sort of tier when it came to the amount of cover that they offer. And we didn't see any kind of red flags when it came to checking about their complaints history or their claims acceptance rates. I will say, I guess what it doesn't show you, if a provider gets Best Buy status with us, it doesn't say anything, for example, about them being cheap or expensive. It's not really that type of analysis. And what we also don't have as part of that analysis is an in-depth kind of view on how good the customer service is. It's really based around the product and how good the product appears to us. But then with a little bit of kind of due diligence just to show there isn't anything, really concerning in terms of how it seems to operate in practice.
And shall we get into then, for any of our listeners, what next? They need to buy travel insurance. Where do you start? How do you go about choosing a policy?
I think it's really interesting what Dean said before about making sure your insurance policy is really tailored to you and your specific trip. Because one of the biggest areas that I tend to look at is whether I'm going to have equipment coverage. So for my gadgets and things like that. So I often travel with my laptop, which is worth over £1,000. And quite often that's an area where you don't see a huge amount of coverage, or it's quite a high excess, in even to the point of you going, you almost may as well buy a brand new thing. If somebody steals that away from you, leave it somewhere. So for me, that's one of the key areas I look at, actually, because there tends to be less policies that offer a generous gadget cover for that kind of thing. So yeah, I think it's absolutely about working out what works for you. And if you really do need to make that claim, what is the policy that's going to make your life a little bit easier? But actually hearing that list, Dean, is fantastic. I absolutely love the work that you do in terms of this deep dive on who is actually offering a good product. So hearing that kind of data, hearing that you've done all that research on it, that's the kind of thing that when I hear about it, when I read about it, those names stay in my head, because it means when I'm shopping around for my next travel insurance policy, they're the ones I will gravitate towards.
So you've got in mind the policies that we think are great products. You've also got in mind what it is that you need, what you need from your policy. Then what? Would you suggest going to comparison websites, one or two?
Yeah, I think comparison sites are a really useful, really empowering tool, because they just mean that you can compare scores of providers, hundreds of quotes in about 5 minutes, which is really useful. But they do have limitations, and you need to take that on board. So one of them is that they will show you some top line information about what's covered in the policy, and you can use that to narrow down the range of providers that you're interested in. But I think before parting with money, there's not really any substitute for actually having a look at the policy wording, which no one really enjoys doing it. I don't think anyone really wants to sit down, spend an afternoon reading policy wording from cover to cover. It's unfortunately the case that if your insurer is going to decline a claim, its reason for doing so is going to be in that book. So it's worth checking it, basically. One thing that I do is I just make a list of things that I expect to be in the policy that I buy, that I want. And then I basically just have a little 20-minute exercise or so of just searching for them in the wording and checking that it explicitly says that they're covered. One of the things with comparison sites in travel insurance, probably that's quite specific to travel insurance in ways that you won't find with like car insurance or something, is that there's big sections of the market that won't be present on comparison sites. For example, what you might find is that specialist insurers that basically market towards and specialize in covering people with pre-existing medical conditions often won't appear in the comparison sites. So this can lead people plugging in their details into a comparison site, getting a list of no's or just really high prices, and just assuming that they're uninsurable and just going without cover. There are actually some really good resources for finding insurers that won't necessarily appear there. So one of them is the Money Helper website, which has a directory which was created by the FCA of travel insurers that are medical specialists. So if you go there, you might see some insurers there that you won't have come across otherwise that will be worth checking out. And then also, if there are other reasons that are causing you difficulty finding affordable cover, it could be worth trying a broker. So there's the British Insurance Brokers Association. It has a Find Insurance service. The service basically just helps you find a broker with a specialism in the area that might help you find the best insurer for your needs.
I'm really pleased we managed to cover that point, actually. It's super useful. And the whole show has been really informative. But before we wrap up, is there any nuggets of advice that you would want to leave our listeners with?
I would just say, just double check what you already have. There's a surprising amount of places where you can find some insurance, i.e., is it connected to a credit card or a bank account you already have? Or perhaps with the contents insurance on your house, does that cover all your gadgets? So just take a lay of the land, see what you have already, and then search for exactly what you're after for your trip.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, actually. There's so many kind of ways that you can wind up having cover and not really being familiar with it. I guess one other thing, actually, is with policies that come attached to other things. So this can include with bank accounts, with credit cards, cover that's sold by holiday companies. If you've got medical conditions, sometimes it might be that you actually have to proactively get in touch with them to tell them about your medical condition before it will actually be covered. And until that's happened, it will be automatically excluded. So if you've got any kind of concerns about anything medically in your history that you want to ensure is covered, just check. Don't assume it is covered.
Thanks, Dean. Well, thank you both so much. It's been a brilliant episode. I know I was talking about before we started the recording that I'm desperate for a holiday. This has made me feel even more like I want to get away. But Chelsea, if our listeners want to hear more from you, well, firstly, they'll hear from you in our Get Answers podcast, where you'll be talking about going on holiday for a budget. But where else can people hear from you?
So I like to say to people, get onto Instagram and type in the word cheap. And hopefully my face will pop up at some point. But it's Cheap Holiday Expert across all the different platforms and also on cheapholidayexpert.com.
Brilliant. Thank you, Chelsea. And thank you, of course, to Dean as well.
Thank you.
Well, a huge thank you again to Chelsea and Dean for coming on the show today, and to you for listening to this week's episode of the Which Money podcast. If you enjoyed today's show, please do hit subscribe to make sure you catch our new episodes as soon as they drop. For daily money news and advice, you can find us on social media at Which Money and online at which.co.uk/money. And we also have a free money newsletter which is delivered to your inbox every Monday. To sign up, visit which.co.uk/money newsletter. This episode of the Which Money podcast was written by me, Lucia Ariano, and produced and edited by Adrian Bradley.